Daniel chapter number 3, verses number 19 through 27. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his vintage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the princes, the governors, the captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither was their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. This miracle was literally jaw-dropping, eye-popping, completely unbelievable. In our story, we find some interesting details. When we start out in the 19th verse, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, had given the order to bind them and throw them in the fiery furnace. But it appears that the king was so infuriated with them. It not only talks about how he became disfigured, he actually left his throne and went to the fiery furnace just to watch them burn. He was literally that upset. You know how it is. I'm going to see it for myself. I am the king. Nobody disobeys me. Not realizing he is disobeying the one and only king. So when he got there, though, he saw a surprise. Now, this wonderful miracle that totally surprised everyone, we can find that God sent his angel to deliver the Hebrew boys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, we can see, if we keep reading the king's writing, as we will find out in the very next one, the next video, he actually states that God sent his angel and he actually delivered him. Now, being delivered from the fiery furnace is really not anything new in the scripture, although this is the most proclaimed incident in Judaism. Abraham was delivered from the furnace according to the oral tradition when Nimrod threw him in the fiery furnace. And once again, that's according to Jewish tradition. And you can read some scriptures that somewhat hint at this as well. But we're not going to dig into that right now. But what we are going to dig into is another well-documented incident of someone standing up for God being thrown or being placed in the midst of fire and God working miraculously. Polycarp, the Bishop of Smyrna. The book of Revelation, let's go there real quickly. In the 2nd chapter, verses 2 through 11, talks to the church at Smyrna. And verse number 10, fear none of these things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna. Smyrna was one of the only 2 churches that received no rebuke in the original letter. We know that Christ told John to write the letter to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And Philadelphia did not receive any rebuke. And Smyrna was the only other church that received no rebuke. They were only encouraged. And as we just read, it was prophesied some of them would face death. So we see where Polycarp is mentioned, or persecution is mentioned here. And Polycarp's death is well documented. You can search his name on the internet and you can go through and read this and pause it at any time. It talks about his miraculous death. I mean, if you get a chance, just go back and read the whole history of Polycarp. This whole incident is just utterly fascinating. And it talks about how an angry mob of unbelievers or pagans at one of their festivals called for the death of Polycarp. They was calling him the unbeliever. Why? Because he didn't believe in Caesar as God. Right when they was at their peak. This auditorium in Smyrna, by some accounts, held 20,000 people. And they went and got Polycarp. Polycarp was a faithful man, taught under John himself, the Apostle John, standing strong. They tried to get him to blaspheme God. Polycarp made the famous statement, 86 years have I known the Lord, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme his name? What a bold statement. And then they kept urging Polycarp. Polycarp would not back down. Polycarp would not blaspheme. They would say, just offer a smidget of incense to Caesar and proclaim him Lord, and you don't have to suffer. Polycarp said, let it be known I am a Christian. They threatened him by feeding him to wild beasts. It didn't bother him. Then they threatened him with burning him at the stake. It did not bother him. And then after they tried to get the beast, and they said it's not lawful because their showtime is passed. So they was going to burn him at the stake. And this is well recorded. When they burned him at the stake, the flame formed an envelope, or like a ship sail with him in the middle, and it did no harm to his body. This is well recorded and well documented. And then finally, what they did was they sent the executioner down there with a dagger and killed him. And his blood was so till it extinguished that whole flame. The power of God. Learn the stories of the Bible. They repeat. Yes, some of the Christians, many of them died through the lions. Many of them died through being burned at the stake. But God still works miracles. Just like the Hebrew boys, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, just like Polycarp. And just like he's going to do when Antichrist does the same thing. God, we bless you and we praise you. Help us to proclaim your name and be strong in you and stand for what you want us to stand for.